Hello and thank you for joining us on The Spin Room. I'm your host, Ami Kaufman. Our three spin doctors today are former Israeli ambassador to France, Daniel Shek, editor of HistoryCentral.com and Newsweek correspondent in Israel, Marc Schulman, and senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Dan Diker. It is good to see all three of you. Thanks for coming on the show today. Our three topics of discussion today with our esteemed guests are, in just a few hours, U.S. President Donald Trump will announce his decision on the fate of the Iran nuclear deal. We'll then tackle the heightened tensions between Iran and Israel in Syria. And we'll end with the release from prison today of the Hebron shooter after 9 months in jail for shooting in the head a wounded Palestinian who minutes earlier attacked Israeli soldiers. Okay, our first topic is the Iran nuclear deal. It's decision day for U.S. President Donald Trump. In just a few hours, the world will know, is the U.S. in or out? There seems to be a consensus that Trump will ignore last-ditch efforts by European leaders urging him to stay with the agreement, and that he will kill the deal, which he has time and again labeled as, quote, very badly negotiated. Daniel, will May 8th, 2018 go down in history as the day that Donald Trump killed the Iran nuclear deal?
Look, since life under Donald Trump is a never-ending cliffhanger, nobody knows, really. I mean, it looks like...
Put your money where your mouth is?
No, I don't want... I can put my money where my mouth is, but not where Donald Trump's mouth is. No, seriously, you know, it looks quite clear that he will either completely withdraw or find some way to minimize American commitment to that agreement, unless in a last-minute effort it turns out that the Europeans are on board with him to really put some pressure on the Iranians to profoundly modify this agreement, which I'm not sure it's on the cards. It may not be a final decision. It may be just another turn of the screw on the Europeans and the Iranians. It still gives some time. It depends how he withdraws. And I repeat, it's not canceling the deal. He can't cancel the deal. No. He can withdraw the United States commitment to it. The rest...
And then the sanctions come in. And then
he gives the Iranians now the lead on this. The Iranians will determine what happens next.
Dan, would you agree with that assessment, that it puts the ball in Iran's court after this?
Well, I think it's just a formality. I mean, the ping pong ball has been being thrown back and forth. I think that Ambassador Shek is absolutely right that there are two ways of looking at this. One, the Europeans feel you lose much more by getting by decommitting from the deal than you do by staying in.
And what do you think?
And so my sense is that the president could well ratchet up sanctions while staying in the deal until he negotiates, sees how the North Korea negotiations go, because that's going to be his major message to the Iranians, is what is the way the North Korea deal goes. But at the same time, the president understands something that Prime Minister Netanyahu and other prime ministers in Israel have understood, that what Israel today faces in Syria and in Lebanon is precisely the failure of the JCPOA, because it does not cover Iran's malevolent behavior and terrorist behavior, and that is what has to change immediately. No one is sure that that can actually be injected into what is considered a sort of a failed deal.
Marc, there seems to be some kind of consensus that he is going to pull out of the deal. Is there an upside to leaving the deal? Is there
I can't really see it. I mean, look,
you can't.
No, look, there's a chance it has an upside. There always can be an upside. If somehow he can pull a rabbit out, if somehow the Iranians cave in, if things change radically, anything is possible. He's taking the risk that you can get a better deal. That's the big question. It's a risk. I think it's too big a risk to take, frankly. I have not heard from anyone, either in Washington or Jerusalem, what is Plan B? What happens tomorrow, the day after we pull out of the agreement? One of the biggest problems of pulling out of the agreement is moving out unilaterally. I mean, the success of the deal, however it was successful or not, was the fact the whole world was behind it. The United States is going to pull out, and it's going to be alone.
Well, you talk about the risk, and this is a good chance to show a clip that we have from yesterday's show, The Spin Room, where we had former ambassador to Israel, the U.S. Ambassador Daniel Shek, who talked about the risk. I think he seems very concerned, as you can see, for what we're going to hear from him. Let's take a look.
I believe Iran is a very dangerous country, and I believe they want to achieve nuclear weapons. If we give up all of our diplomatic paths, we actually have a military option. We need to be prepared to use it as a last resort. President Obama put it in place.
Okay.
But obviously that comes with risk for people on all sides.
He elaborated about that on Twitter as well. He was talking about deaths, basically. People could die because of this.
Right, absolutely. I had a discussion with him on the same subject, and my fear is that that's the direction we're heading. That if there is no diplomatic effort going on, that what's the end result? What's the end plan here? Is there a plan? Is there a way to stop us from ending up in a military confrontation? Now, I hope there is, but I'm worried about that, quite frankly.
What do you think about what Daniel Shapiro said, Daniel, that he fears loss of life?
I think the real danger right now, which was not planned, of course, when the Trump administration first started talking about withdrawing, is the combination between the tension around the Iran nuclear deal and what's happening in Syria.
Yeah.
The sudden
we'll get to that, but yes.
But I mean, these things have have a cumulative effect. In a sense, we'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
This is now the real risk, because you can deal rationally, and the Iranians are very rational. They can deal rationally with the pros and cons of staying in the deal even without the United States, which they can choose to do, or just, saying, okay, you broke the deal, I'm breaking the deal too, I'm full gas to enrichment, to
getting
weaponizing, etc., etc., etc. We don't know which one it will be. But this situation in Syria can be the little thing that deviates them from a fully rational response, and that's where I think we should be very careful right now.
Dan, if indeed the president does pull out of the deal tonight and he announces that, do you think Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu can view that as a personal victory? Can he take credit for a lot of that?
I don't know if he can take credit for it. It certainly measures up to what Prime Minister Netanyahu has publicly said, that he's very concerned with. The fix it or nix it expression was an Israeli expression, and it definitely reflects Prime Minister Netanyahu's preference that the deal be nixed, because he doesn't see too many ways under the current diplomatic circumstances where the European partners of the P5+1 will agree to fix it substantially. And yes, it could lead to a confrontation. But let's be very rational about this and understand that the Iranian regime has been at war with Israel in the West for 40 years, 39 to be exact. And the fact is that the Iranian regime operates like an octopus. They operate Hezbollah in the north and the Pakistanis and the Afghani mercenaries in the north, and they mobilize the Hamas in the south, and as well as we know now Morocco, and as well as in Yemen and across the Middle East, in Iraq and across the Middle East. So at the end of the day, Israel has bad choices and bad choices, and the question is, what is the least bad choice that Israel can make in order to protect its citizenry under a situation where you have a radical Shiite Islamic regime that's prepared to go to heaven in order to attack what they call the arrogant West, which Israel represents.
Mark, what about back home in the States? Will Trump face a lot of criticism for leaving this deal? Because it is somewhat bipartisan, isn't it?
Yeah, so according to the polls that I saw this morning, more than 70% of the Americans want the United States to remain in the deal.
In the deal.
In the deal, including a majority of Trump supporters. So he's taking a position outside his norm. I mean, obviously his base will say, great, 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 because there's nothing he can do that his base will oppose. But the overwhelming majority of Americans are in favor of staying in the deal. Because from an American standpoint, I mean, look, in Israel we can argue back and forth. We're the ones who are most threatened by the Iranians. But for the United States people do not want to get involved in a war with Iran, and that's what they're afraid of.
Daniel.
What you describe is absolutely true, and it's also correct that there is a real Iranian threat that has nothing to do with the nuclear issue. But you have to be honest, the Iran nuclear deal dealt with the nuclear issue and not anything else. It was not supposed to deal with anything else. It is supervised by the IAEA. Counterterrorism can't be supervised by the IAEA. So you can now decide that Iran has so badly misbehaved that you need an international effort to put pressure on it through sanctions in order to stop their support of terrorism. But you can't connect that directly to the JCPOA, which was not meant to deal with it.
Okay, we have to go for a commercial break. When we come back, more with Daniel Shek, Dan Diker, and Marc Schulman. And we are now moving on to our second topic, which is closely related to the Iran nuclear deal, Iran's proxy war against Israel in Syria. Iran has vowed repeatedly repeatedly to retaliate for Israel's alleged attack on Iranian targets in Syria. According to Amos Harel, the military analyst for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, Iran seems poised to take a page out of Israel's military strategy book by responding to Israel's attacks while retaining ambiguity and not devolving into all-out war with Israel. Dan, many here in Israel are expressing concerns of a new war on the northern front, this time with Iran and Syria. Maybe it's proxies in Syria. Do you agree with that? Do you think we're headed to maybe a direct confrontation with Iran in the next few days, even weeks?
It could very well be. You're hearing all kinds of hints from government ministers as well as military analysts and former senior military officials that Israeli military intelligence is detecting on the Syrian in Syria advanced moves towards preparation for some sort of action. Obviously, we don't know; it's in the future, but these are very much the indications coming out of Israel, including just minutes ago by Education and Security Cabinet Minister Bennett, who said it very clearly at the Herzliya conference.
Yeah, he also voiced some concern yesterday about the results of the election in Lebanon, saying he's very worried about how this all connects, and now that Hezbollah is a lot more powerful, Lebanon, Hezbollah equals Lebanon. That's what he tweeted yesterday. It just adds to a lot what's going on into the region. But Marc, I want to ask you about something that Daniel Shek brought up in the earlier segment, how everything is connected with Iran and Syria. You know, if the U.S. pulls out from the nuclear deal tonight, do you think it could influence a, quote, disappointed Iran to be more aggressive on the Israeli front in Syria?
I think it certainly could. Look, one of the issues in terms of timing of the supposed Iranian response was they were going to wait until, A, the elections.
See what happens, right?
First they were waiting for the elections, and then they were waiting for the decision, which we all thought was going to happen later this week on Saturday, the 12th. For whatever reason, President Trump decided to move it up to today.
Yeah.
So the reason for waiting will no longer be there as of tonight, I guess, one way or the other. Look, the whole question of what sort of confrontation we may have with Syria and with Iran all comes down to Hezbollah, ultimately. The one question that I don't think we really know for sure is Nasrallah 100% under the control of the Iranians? Or will the fact that they almost won the election in Lebanon give them a reason not to get involved right now? I mean, the only real war we can have with Iran is with Hezbollah being their proxy.
Right.
Because Iran doesn't really have the ability to hurt us in any significant way. Mm-hmm. Only Hezbollah does.
Well, you have tens of thousands of Iranian operatives on the ground in Syria building Air Force bases and other military installations.
But they can build whatever they want, but they can't really successfully attack us without the missiles that Hezbollah has in Lebanon. And if we keep on destroying their missiles when they bring them to Syria, they're not going to have anything to attack us with. The key threat to us is the Hezbollah missiles that are sitting in Lebanon.
The rockets.
The rockets. Missiles, rockets, they're both, a little bit of both, actually, at this point. That's the true threat to us. Without them, there is no true threat. Now, we just don't know. I mean, maybe somebody does, but we really do not know whether Nasrallah is totally under the control of the Iranians or just heavily, heavily influenced. And that's really going to be the key.
Some of the scenarios that Israeli media is talking about is missiles from Syria by these Iranian proxies, be it Hezbollah or another group, not necessarily on civilians, but on military targets, military bases, because that's what Israel allegedly attacked in Syria. Bases, not civilians.
I think there is the Iranians still understand that there's a serious imbalance in power between Israel and whatever troops they have there, including probably the Iranian army, which is thousands of miles away. But, you know, we have to point out something. If there is an eruption of violence between Israel and Iran, be it in Syria or be it in Lebanon or be it a combination of both, this one's on Vladimir Putin. He allowed the Iranian troops to enter Syria. He allowed this situation where regular Iranian troops are at an unsafe distance from the Israeli border.
Do you think he's regretting that?
I don't know.
Well, things are kind of spiraling out of control now, aren't they?
He definitely should, because this is, I think, the vortex of the tension between Israel and Iran is in this small, relatively small, contingent of Iranian regular soldiers who are physically too close for comfort
to the border,
to the Israeli border.
I think it's very, first of all, Ambassador Shek makes a very important point, is that Russia really has a very problematic game here. And that's why Prime Minister Netanyahu is on his way to Moscow almost as we speak in the coming hours, which is an interesting indication of Russian behavior, because it's no one else, no other leader in this very complicated, bloody chess game other than Netanyahu has been invited to Moscow. That's a very important point.
Well, with all due respect, Dan, he's been invited to Moscow how many times?
No, now it's game. Now is money time. Now is money time. Everything is about to explode.
Now it's different.
Hold a second.
Now Putin is going to listen.
In the tension, Moscow and Israel are speaking directly. It's a very important. I think it's an important diplomatic point. The other point to remember is,
wait a minute. What's the result of this meeting going to be?
What's that?
What's the result of this meeting going to be? Or what do you think?
If anyone thinks he knows, he's lying.
Well, it's money time.
We don't know how much.
But
okay,
the point,
the other result of such a meeting should have happened 3 or 4 meetings back.
Ago, right?
They didn't succeed. Obviously, they didn't.
Okay, let's wrap it up.
But the other 2 points are, the Russians did not respond to the continuance of American troops in Syria, and American troops have not been targeted by the Russians, by Russian cover or Russian-Iranian cooperation in Syria. And it's interesting that Israel has reportedly struck these weapons convoys from Syria to Lebanon some 100 times, according to foreign reports, and Russia has not responded to any of those in one way or the other.
It's an important indication. Russia's patience is maybe
Russia has one interest, and that's keeping Assad in power. The Iranians are sort of a sideshow as far as they're concerned. Now, how the Iranians influence keeping Assad in power is another interesting question we don't have an answer to. Look, we made a lot of choices in terms of Syria. We decided not to become involved, and we've ended up with this worst possible outcome right now, and we'll have to see how it develops. We have too many players involved, and it's awfully dangerous to say the least.
There's a very important point here that there is... Oh, Dan, go ahead.
No, just the problem is that with such situations, we can analyze our, until...
We're red in the face.
Yeah, exactly. 100 things can go wrong in this analysis, and in most cases, at least one of them does.
Yeah. By the way,
then things are suddenly out of hand, out of control, and you just have it snowballing into a real...
Are you at all worried about... I'm going to ask all of you before we go to the break. When you talk about things getting out of control, we're talking about May being a very tense month with the U.S. Embassy moving on May 14th from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Nakba Day right after that. It seems like Israel is getting into really, really hot water now. Can Israel handle so many fronts if things start to really, if this powder keg explodes?
Well, according to the Israeli government, they've said it publicly that they're able to handle multiple fronts. I think the important point is it's not that Israel's being dragged into something. Israel's policy towards Lebanon has changed. It's a policy of active, aggressive engagement of the enemy. In the past, 2000, 2006, opposite Iran and opposite Lebanon, they played disconnect. Now they're playing aggressively connect with the enemy. It's a very important point. So Israel has, with a lot of forethought, strategic forethought, engaging the enemy at this juncture.
I think it's the opposite. We've created a lot of these situations. And whether good or bad, like Lieberman said, there's a cost to moving the embassy. We may pay for it in terms of violence. There's a cost to our involvement.
There's a cost. What price is he talking about?
That's the big question. We don't know what cost he's talking about. We probably will see a cost, and we're certainly going to see a cost along the borders, and we'll see demonstrations whether it's, he says it's worth it. We'll have to see whether it's worth it. Okay. Look, we're engaging strategically, no question. Is that good right now? Open question. Okay. History will tell us.
We have our last topic of the day is the young man known as the Hebron shooter. The Israeli soldier, Elor Azaria, who was convicted for the killing of an incapacitated Palestinian assailant in 2016, was released today after serving 9 months in prison. His release was brought forward by 2 days as he requested to attend his brother's wedding. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he was, quote, glad it's done with. The court ruling has been a flashpoint issue within Israel, with many right-wing Israeli politicians condemning Azaria's conviction and arguing that he should have been pardoned. I want to show you guys first a tweet from the Education Minister, Naftali Bennett, and head of the right-wing party, the Jewish Home, part of the coalition, who tweeted congratulations, here it is, to Elor Azaria, along with a picture of the family. We don't have the picture, but the tweet itself had the picture saying it's good to have you home. What do you make of this, Marc?
Look, it's a natural result. I did reserve duty in 1981 in Gaza. And I was a reservist, a little bit older, and I saw the regular soldiers there and how they treated the Palestinians. And I realized right then and there we have to find a way to getting out of here, because what it's going to do to society. And now it's 40 years later practically, and it's really happened. And we you occupy people for so long you react to them in such a way, and of course a lot of them are terrorists at various points, etc. And that's what happens, and it's really sad, and it says a lot of terrible things about our society that we can let someone out after 9 months when he killed someone in cold blood.
Daniel, what do you think of that, and that tweet especially?
Look, I'm not known to be in agreement with Benjamin Netanyahu very often, but I agree with him. I'm glad it's over.
Glad it's over?
But I don't see any reason to congratulate anybody about this. It's not one of the more glorious moments of Israeli society or of Tzahal. I think the least to blame on this is actually Elor Azaria himself, who became sort of a playing ball, a political ball, a pawn that people manipulated here and there.
But he pulled the trigger.
He pulled the trigger.
You have to blame him.
He did it wrong.
The court
he was
blames him.
tried by a court. He was condemned to a very, very, very lenient prison.
Too lenient?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I trust the judges, regardless of it. Now he's out. I hope he can go back to a real life. He's a young man, and he should put this behind him like Israeli society should.
Dan, this story really divided Israelis in a way that few other stories I think I've seen. What do you think in this story caused such a division here in Israel? What is at the core of the argument?
I think the what you call the division is actually one of the greatest positive and wonderful characteristics of the Israeli society. This is a situation, a very unfortunate situation, in which a decorated soldier who had never had anything but a positive record shoots a terrorist who had just himself attempted to kill his comrade, his friend in Hebron, and he shot this person. He claimed that the terrorist was about to pull a suicide vest. He was convicted. He served time. Let's not self-destruct on this issue. Israel is a vibrant and moral society, and the proof of the pudding is that it was the biggest story or a huge story in the last 2.5 years. Israeli society was racked. Its ethical conscience was racked over this, and that's a very healthy sign of a vibrant democracy. And I think, unfortunately, in the international community, it's looked upon as just another example, of how bad the Israeli army is. And I think not. I think it's exactly the opposite.
I think that's not the issue, but I don't think it's a glorious moment for Israeli society, and I don't think that it's any proof of the vibrant democracy. I think, on the contrary, this is proof of the porous nature of Israeli society, because this should have been a very clear-cut situation. His entire military hierarchy disagreed with him. The military courts disagreed with him, and that should have been that. That's how democracy works.
Yeah.
There's a hierarchy, there are rules, there are courts, and there is no room for any kind of political debate around them.
Marc, would you agree with Dan about how it's portrayed in international media or Western media?
No, I don't think so. Look, the fact of the matter is that this was a political case, because what happened when it started, we forget the fact that for the first 5 minutes, Prime Minister Netanyahu attacked what he had done and condemned it, and then he pulled back. And that was the reason why Bogi Ya'alon is no longer...
They say social media played a big part in that.
He gave in to the cries from the right wing that he's the soldier, everyone's soldier.
Yeah. Not for the first, not for the last time.
And that was really terrible. It was a terrible thing that happened the way it happened, and the fact that he became a hero. Listen, we can question how long his sentence should be. We can question the fact that he should have gone for 3 years or 2 years or 1 year. But to make him a hero... He wasn't a hero.
Yeah.
He did something wrong. And he should have admitted that, and that was the end of it.
Lying on the ground.
Right.
Really nothing heroic about it.
And
he may have been wrong, he may have been right, but heroic?
I don't think anyone's making him into a hero.
Oh, of course there is. Oh, come on.
I don't think so. I think it became
You don't think Naftali Bennett made him into a hero?
No, it became a left-right political football, as Danny said before. Absolutely right. But he's nowhere near a hero. It was an ugly episode for Israeli society. I think that everybody's happy that it's over.
One of the things that came up, by the way, in international media was these comparisons that I've seen with, for example, with Ahed Tamimi, the Palestinian girl who also got about 9 months in jail, but for slapping an IDF soldier. So how do you think that makes Israel look?
Look, this
big silence.
I was asking Dan.
Silence in the studio.
The reason this sounds is totally incomparable. I mean, this attempt to create moral parity between, a young girl that assaults Israelis.
Slap and a bullet?
A slap and a bullet.
that assaults an Israeli soldier who is guarding, who is on guard. Of course, it's totally incomparable.
She should get out, and he should have served longer.
It's totally incomparable.
It's absurd that she went to jail for 9 months for giving a guy a slap, and he went to jail for 9 months for shooting and killing somebody.
He was a soldier in the service of his country, and he made a mistake.
Follow orders.
And this is a typical. I understand where you're coming from, Mark, but really, what you do is you contribute to the false and misleading comparisons that is currently undermining the state of Israel's actual legitimacy.
Okay, that is all the time we have. I want to thank our panelists, Marc Schulman.
No, this type of false, it's ridiculous.
Dan Diker and Daniel Shek.